All right. Okay, that's it. We are on. What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the LifeXpanded podcast. It's been a while. We've been pretty busy and tired and all the things. But I think we wanted to jump on here today to just share some of the experiences from the first few weeks of being a parent, being parents. And mainly we've had Tara's had a lot of questions with regards to the birth and like how the events kind of unfolded, and I think there's a lot to say with regards to expectations versus reality and how everything's a lot different when you're in it.
You got any plans so far?
Yeah, I think there's lots of lessons in control and surrender and all kinds of things which we'll chat about today. So I'm going to hand it over to Tara because this is definitely for the most part her story.
Yeah.
And just touch base with how life has been lately. And
well, where do you want to start? Do you want to start with the birth story?
I think so. I think everybody's pretty much clued up until
the birth happened. Yeah.
Until the birth happened. So, and the long expectation around that. We're waiting for weeks.
And he was overdue by 4 days. So I went to 40 weeks and 4 days before I went into labor. And as many of you know who have been requesting this birth video, I went through many different loopholes to try and get him into the perfect position for birth. I made various videos about it. I got all sorts of funny equipments and tools and did all the moves and spent hours every day trying to get him to move from posterior to anterior position. But unfortunately he didn't move before my birth happened. But yeah, jumping straight into the birth, I actually had what was called prodromal labor, so contractions that don't continue or get more. They kind of stop after a couple of hours. So that happened 4 days prior to the actual labor. So the night that I did go into labor, which was the 14th of November, I actually called you to my room and asked you to push on my hips and help me breathe through some of the contractions. But I was convinced they were just going to stop again in the morning.
If anybody's confused at this point, we were sleeping in separate rooms because Tara had to build herself a fort with the pregnancy pillows and all the things. So
there was no space for Darryn in my bed. And then the night of the 14th, I think it was 11 p.m. the contractions started. And then that morning I actually had a gynae appointment. And the contractions didn't stop in the morning. They were continuing, but they were very sporadic. They were like 15, 20 minutes apart, sometimes 7 minutes apart. I could easily talk through them. They weren't quite hectic at all. I was timing them, and we decided just to go to the gynae appointment and see what's going on. And so we got to the gynae. She checked me. I was 2 centimeters dilated.
The gynae, we must remember, we stayed like an hour from the hospital because we stayed out in Scarborough, which is quite far from the city life. And so going to the hospital is like a good hour drive. So yes, just put that in there because I think it was one of the reasons we were kind of averse to home birth was so far from medical care, but also just wanting to the first birth just be more
in an environment. If something went wrong, I feel safer in hospital, and essentially you want to be wherever you feel safe when you're giving birth. And so we went to the gynae appointment. This was now 11 a.m. on the 15th of November. Contractions were kind of coming quite regularly now. I'd say about 5-10 minutes apart. But they were kind of still very sporadic, no rhythm, no pattern to them. And my gynae checked me, and she didn't even charge us for the consultation. She was like, "My darling, you're in labor. Go get your stuff and come back to the hospital." But she did send us for fetal monitoring at that point. So we went ahead and we got 30 minutes to check if baby boy was responding well to the contractions, if it was okay that I went home. Everything seemed fine. I could go home, but then that's when things started getting really real. Once I got off that bed after the fetal monitoring, the contraction, I think I had 5 contractions between the hospital and the car, and the midwife that was with me had to press on my hips and help me breathe through them because it was the first time I couldn't talk through the contractions. They literally went from 0 to 100 within the space of 10 minutes. And you were in the car.
Yeah, I think,
you were in the car, and the midwife says to me, she looks at me, she goes, she didn't know we lived in Scarborough. She goes, you're not going to spend much time at home, eh? At this point, you need to go get your stuff and come straight back to the hospital. I looked at her, and we got in the car, and at that point, as we're driving out of the hospital, I knew we fucked up. I knew we shouldn't have left the hospital, or I shouldn't have left the hospital, because at that point, from the moment I got into the car, the contractions were 1 to 3 minutes apart consistently. and they were getting really intense.
Yeah, your labor had kind of just really ramped up.
I think the cervical check kind of
yeah,
irritated the cervix, but I had been in labor since 11 p.m. the night before, so it kind of it was just, you know, the progression was very gradual initially, and then it just switched.
Yeah, it's another conversation around interventions, and like as soon as that check happened, things just kicked off because you were only 2 centimeters dilated.
Yeah.
And the procedure is not ready to let people go home once they're in labor, but they were like, okay, you can go home, but just come back. And even at that point, I was like, sure, we've still got time.
Yeah, but I also thought we still had time until I got in the car, and then I realized.
Yeah. We had to drive all the way home.
So we drove all the way home, and if anyone has had contractions and driven to the hospital, you know how brutal it is to endure surges whilst in a car, because there's no position that's comfortable. There's bumps, there's turns, you're in so much pain. Anyway, so we made it home eventually after an hour.
I think it ramped up so much that even I was like, this is not normal for it to be so hectic so quick. So driving home, we're like I don't think we should have left the hospital.
No.
And my fault for that morning Tara had all the stuff packed in the car, but I needed to collect some things close to the hospital, like a bunch of products. So I had to go and collect that. So I took all of her hospital stuff out the car because I was like, there's no ways we're going to need to stay at the hospital. We're obviously going to come back home. So I took all the hospital stuff out of the car, and driving back home, I was like, is this going to happen? Like
in the car?
Like, this is fucking crazy, because now we like driving home still, and Tara's just like moaning the whole way.
I literally became someone that now, I mean, you'll see the Instagram reel, I'll tag it in the description below. You'll hear me, I've left the sound on in the reel that I made about little snippets that we got of the birth, and I literally became an animal. I don't recognize myself when I listen to myself moaning like that. It's something else takes over you when you go into the labor process and you're just surviving. You just want to get through it. Each contraction you just want to get through. But I think the most intense part was that I went from being able to talk through my contractions to instantly not even being able to catch my breath during contractions. So there was no real transition. It was quick. It was really, really quick. And then we were in the car, adding anxiety because we were moving away from the hospital in a time where I thought we should be going to the hospital.
And also, we had this idea of, okay, we're going to have so much time at home to labor at home that we have time to like get things ready and pack and that. And so we were speaking to the doula. Actually, we had 2 doulas.
Yeah.
And they're like, get home and relax. But clearly they obviously weren't there to see what you were going through. And I was like, I get it, we can relax, but this isn't any relaxing time. This is like full-on contractions.
This was this was transition mode. My contractions now at this point when we got home were a minute apart, sometimes no breaks between them, and so it was so non-stop that I couldn't catch my breath between them, and I started to panic because this is not what I had learned in the antenatal classes. At this point in the contractions, it's almost time to push. And so I thought, fuck, we're gonna have this baby at home.
Yeah, I honestly thought that. I was like, this is gonna turn into an unplanned home birth, because we got home, you got onto the floor, like in the lounge on the ball.
I couldn't get into any comfortable position. Nothing was comfortable because the contractions were just ongoing.
And then I was simultaneously running a bath and trying to pack the car, because the doulas are like, run a bath and
make
relax.
Her feel comfortable.
And I was like, but this is not normal. Like this is something else going on here.
And Darryn's getting advice from other people, like just to relax and keep me at home a little bit. And then he's asking me questions, and I'm telling him just to pack the effing car. We need to go back to the hospital. Get off your phone.
But there was like no time to pack, because now you're panicking. You're going from 0 to 100.
I know, and I needed
now I'm trying to grab everything that we like. There was a list of things, and then there was even special essential oils that you had planned, like the soil machine, which has like the diffuser.
I had a special oil to help labor progress.
So Tara had everything planned, like 1,000%. She had every single thing ready to go. And then I was like in this panic state, like, what essential oil do I take?
So I'm in like the peak of my contraction, and Darryn comes to me, goes, which essential oil must I pack? I've never felt so much rage in my life. I'm like, just choose a fucking oil. Let's go.
This is after she made me find a special oil somewhere. It was like clary sage or something.
Yeah, clary sage, that's the one.
Anyway, so now I'm like running to the shops, trying to get snacks because we didn't have any snacks on us, trying to get the car packed.
Trying to get the dog sorted out.
Yeah, just trying to get everything sorted and then get in the car. And also it's a bumpy ride back to the hospital. And so that was also quite...
That was intense.
Going back to the hospital, I was never been more stressed in my life. Like, that was probably the worst for me because I thought you were going to give birth in the car.
Yeah.
So I had like her legs open and she was like...
Insert video.
The whole way to the whole way to the hospital, and there was traffic between and the hospital. We were just sitting and I'm like, this is going to happen in the car. Like, I was panicking.
I just remember thinking at one point while I'm moaning, we're sitting in dead still traffic and there's people right next to me and I just don't know what I must have looked like to them.
I was like, at one point I was like, do I put my hazards on and try and just like be one of those people? And I was like, this is crazy. But we eventually got there.
Yeah.
I've never been so happy to see a hospital in my life. And luckily the doula was there, Amy. She was incredible. And I was like, Amy, thank God, I've never been happier to see somebody. Please take her. Like,
Darryn was just like, take her.
Take her. Out of my hands.
At this point, I couldn't even get out the car. We arrived at the hospital and obviously the contractions were coming and coming. And they like, you guys want me to get out the car, but I'm contracting. So I can't walk. And then from the car to the maternity ward, I had about like 8 contractions. I remember having to stop in the middle of like the entrance hall of the hospital, and people are sitting having coffee there, others are waiting at the reception, and there's me in the middle of the hospital entrance moaning like an animal, and I couldn't stop it. And Amy's just like trying to guide me through it. I'm like, but there's people, and she's like, don't worry about the people. I was like, oh my god, this is so embarrassing.
Only you would worry about that.
But this has been 3 hours since the contractions really kicked off. So we finally got back to the hospital, finally got to the maternity ward. All the labor rooms were full because Rogan decided to come on the day where I think there were like 8 other births happening at the same time.
Yeah, there wasn't even a fucking hospital room.
There wasn't a room for me to labor in, so I actually had to labor in the hall for a couple of minutes with the TENS machine on, the comb in my hand. Nothing was working.
Oh, we had this TENS machine, sorry. Yeah. And like, this thing is supposed to like, it's strapped to the back and it gives electrical impulses to like help with the pain. But we hadn't figured out how to use the machine yet because I thought we'd had time. But now we're like trying to put this machine on and we don't know how the thing works. And we're pushing buttons. Eventually you're like, okay, I can feel something.
Oh, but that didn't touch sides with the transition of the contractions. I was in already. But so then we got into the labor room eventually, and they checked me and I was 5-6 centimeters dilated. So in 3 hours I went from 2 to 5-6 centimeters. I remember she the
things were happening quick.
Put her fingers in and she checked me and she goes, "Oh, 5. I can actually stretch you to a 6." I was like, wow, in that short space of time, this baby's coming soon. And so I continued with the laboring and you helped me, and everyone was trying to talk to me and help me breathe through it. I used the gas.
That must have been about 2 o'clock, and then
2 o'clock. So I labored for another 2 hours like that. So total of those back-to-back 1 minute apart contractions was around about 5 hours, if you count the car ride. And then my gynae came in to check me again after 2 hours. At this point, it was now 4 o'clock, and I was like delirious. You said you saw my eyes rolling back in my head.
Yeah, I didn't. I was just like, this is quite hectic. Because Tara's eyes were literally like rolling in the back of her head. She's like,
it was hectic.
And I was like, oh my god.
I wasn't having any breaks. There was no breaks. It was.
I was like, breathing the gas.
There's
this nitric oxide gas you can use.
Yeah, I know. I tried that. The gas didn't do anything. The comb didn't do anything. The TENS machine didn't do anything. At that point, I was just trying to get through each contraction. And I remember at the peak of every contraction thinking, oh my God, I'm going to die. And then it'd stop and I'd catch my breath. And then for like 10 seconds, I would feel completely normal and think, okay, I can do this. And then the next one would start. So I was getting like, if anything, 10 seconds between the contractions for hours. And at that point, my gynae walked in at 4 p.m. and she looked at me and she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No, I'm not okay." And she checked me again, and I think I was still at a 6. So I hadn't dilated more in those 2 hours, but the contractions were coupling. So there was one after the other. And she looked at me and she's like, "Do you want the epidural?" And I said, "Yes." I had to block out both my doulas because they knew my birth plan. That was not the plan. And I was like, she's like, "Do you want it?" I was like, "Yes." And that like phase, that it took him about half an hour to get the epidural in for me. That half an hour,
It was about 4:30, so.
I had so many contractions, and I honestly thought our baby was going to come before, but I hadn't dilated yet. I remember going to the bathroom with one of the doulas because it's a dilation station, but I wanted to wee because I hadn't weed the whole time, and a full bladder can kind of stop baby from dropping down or coming into the pelvis because it takes space. And my doula looks at me and she goes, "Are you sure you want the epidural? You asked me to like get you through each contraction." At this point it had been like 5.5 hours and I was of these intense contractions non-stop. I looked at her and I said, I think I'm gonna die. I need the epidural. So yeah, then we got the epidural and things kind of calmed down for 2-3 hours. That was amazing. I was able to catch my breath again and kind of see the room around me and acknowledge what was happening, take in the fact that I was going to have a baby and all of those things.
Yeah, everything slowed down and your labor kind of just...
It continued. The contractions...
contractions you could see on the screen happening like continuously, but it's just amazing that you didn't feel it.
Yeah.
So you could still feel it somewhat, but it wasn't like the intensity had gone, which was nice. So you had a bit of like relief for a few hours.
I could breathe again, yeah, cause especially having started the day at 11 p.m. the night before. It was a long day.
Yeah.
And then... yeah, then the contractions, after about a couple of hours, the epidural actually started wearing off on the left side.
And then also what she did, she then asked if you wanted to rupture your membrane.
So what happened was I started feeling the contractions on the left side. So the epidural was wearing off on the left side. So I was feeling the contractions every minute, but only on the left side. And then my gynae came in because she was trying to let me labor as long as possible, around 7 at night. And she checked me and I was like at a 7 centimeters, and she tried to feel for his head and he was still super, super high. So he hadn't dropped and descended into my pelvis. And that's essentially, we think it's because of his positioning, because his face was presenting up instead of turning the other way and tucking his chin under so his head could kind of mold and fit through my pelvis. His head was up and he was knocking my bladder. So my catheter was full of blood. And
that's when things started to get a little bit like, okay, you can see blood in the catheter.
Yeah, things were kind of going downhill at that point.
Well, she broke the membrane. And then
she broke the membrane then to see if that would help him descend into my pelvis, to see if he could get low enough that even if he couldn't get all the way out, she could then essentially try and pop a vacuum on him to get him out vaginally. Broke the waters. The water was clear, so there was no signs of meconium at that stage, and he was still fine, responding well to the contractions. And then... she let another hour pass, and then at that point I could really feel the contractions quite intensely, and the surges were really strong. So my left side was my doula had to help me breathe through each of those minute contractions. My gynae came back in again and he was still super high despite the waters being broken.
You had ruptured the membrane, and then we had been laboring for a while still.
Contractions were still a minute apart, could feel it on my left side. Doula had to help me speak through them, or had to help me breathe through them. And at this point my gynae came in because she had been called as baby's heart rate had started dropping with every contraction. So we tried to do a push to push him out, or to try and see if it would help him drop lower into the pelvis so she could pop a vacuum on. But with that push, his heart rate dropped exponentially, and then it took a while to come back up. And it was at that point that my gynae was called in. She had a look, and
they did the push, and then the heart rate was dropping, but then there was she gave us another hour. She's like, okay, we're gonna wait another hour at least, and try and see. She really did. She was very pro-natural. That's why we chose the specific gynae. She's really incredible. So she really wanted to go the whole way to see how far we could go, and she wanted to give it at least another hour just to see how things progressed.
And then she got called in because his heart rate dropped even further with the contractions, and she told us that essentially I'd been laboring for too long. He still hadn't dropped at all. Something was keeping him up super, super high. And
she was worried because there was blood in the catheter and he was banging against your bladder. And then his heart rate dropped quite a big one with the contraction, and that's always a bad sign.
And what was the problem as well was it took a long time for it to come back up. And so they were really worried about if he did drop into the pelvis, or we popped a vacuum, we try to get him into the birth canal, if his heart rate dropped even further, and it would be a lot more challenging to get him out in time. So then, we made the call to do an emergency cesarean.
She made the call.
We all agreed with her at that point. I was exhausted and just wanted my baby boy out safe. And I think any mom will resonate with that. If you've gone through a hard labor and, you know, you get told that your baby's not responding very well to the contractions, and so you do everything possible to keep them safe. And yeah, it goes red when you do that. Okay. And so, yeah, then at, I think it was 8:30, I got wheeled in for an emergency cesarean. She even bumped me ahead of someone else who was going in for one too. And that was a very traumatic experience because I wasn't prepared for that. You go into a very sterile lit room, bright lights shining on you, and essentially you butt naked, you're getting pumped full of anesthetics, been made to sign all these documents, and then they cut you open and they whip the baby out. And at that point I was responding badly to the anesthesia. My body was in shock and shaking uncontrollably, and then I was nauseous and I had to vomit into the side of a bucket whilst not being able to feel my legs. But baby boy was out, and when he came out I just remember feeling such a massive sigh of relief, and I couldn't believe that was our baby boy. And essentially I made you go and follow him, make sure he was okay. And
I think the theatre room for like a cesarean was not obviously part of our expectations, so everything became very like, almost felt like quite a trip. It felt like a bit of a dream, like what's going on here.
Yeah, we were also
going
super
into the
tired
surgery,
and it'd been a
super
long
tired,
day.
hadn't slept the night before.
Yeah.
And so it was quite an overwhelming like exhaustion, but yeah, it was quite an experience to go through that and to see, you know, how they got him out, and that was very hectic, I think, on your body physically. It was quite worrying.
Yeah, that was really intense because I was responding so badly to the anesthetic, and then I was having such intense contractions because what my gynae explained to me was because he was not in the right position, my body was working overtime to try and contract him into the right position. So she used the term my uterus had gone hypertonic, and that's why the contractions were coupling, so one after the other, because my body was like, oh shit, the baby's not coming out the way it's meant to, so let's contract harder and harder and harder and harder to essentially try and force him out. But that wasn't working because his head was flexed instead of tucked. But those contractions were really, really intense. And when they were cutting me open, she said she had to fight against the contractions. It was almost like creating like a vacuum, like a suction against the way she was trying to pull him out. So it took a bit longer than a normal elective cesarean would because I had the contractions with it too. And I just remember they had to kind of like essentially push on the side of my belly where he was to kind of get him out because it was, he was kind of lodged in there.
Yeah, and I think it's different when you're actually actively in labor and then go for cesarean, and I think most people don't do that. They go for cesarean and everything. It's a bit different.
Yeah.
But, and there's a conversation around that as well, but I think, the most important thing was that he finally was, and it was quite surreal. Like, I must say, it was quite a weird thing to see him come into the world.
It was. They don't look great when they come out full of blood and meconium. Oh, at that point when they cut him out, and they pulled him out, I heard my gynae say, thank goodness we got him out now because he had passed a whole bunch of meconium since they had broken the waters. He was full of his own poo, and that can be quite dangerous for them to breathe in if they're still in the womb at that point. And also another sign that he was in distress in my tummy. But I mean, he did so well. I essentially labored for 24 hours, and he trooped on until the very last minute before he just was obviously tired like I was, and didn't want to come out that hole. He wanted to come out a different hole. And I had to make peace with that, which was really hard initially because I really wanted to experience the natural birth. But I feel like I got all three births in one. I got the natural laboring, going into spontaneous labor, experiencing the contractions, the delirious world you go into when you're laboring, the epidural, and then also the cesarean at the end.
I think there's so much to unpack around it, like the whole birth and birth industry and all these different options. And I think as much as we can criticize Western medicine when it comes to surgeries and interventions like that, it's really a miracle what they can do, and it's there. You'll give credit where credit's due. And so having that option and that becoming the outcome was at least we had that option.
Yeah.
I think the expectations throughout the whole pregnancy with what you wanted in terms of a natural birth and all these things and all the antenatal classes and all the hyper focus and all these things, and it was almost like a
test from the universe.
It was like
I read all the books on natural birthing. I signed us up for antenatal classes. I kind of talked a big talk as well. I was like, I will give natural birth. And
I think that is also where, if you don't surrender your intention and you're so fixated on something, sometimes like we think we have control, but we don't.
I know.
And so having the intention but surrendering the outcome is, I think, where the power is. And I think we continuously learn those lessons. And it was interesting because you had to give control over to something that you didn't have control over.
I know. And I literally, for the last month of my pregnancy, I spent all day, every day, fixating on trying to get him to just essentially rotate this way.
Yeah.
And I spent hours and hours and hours worrying, is he going to be in the right position? And at the end of the day, he came out and he's fine. Even though it wasn't the way I wanted to. So big lesson for me. And I used to bash cesareans as well and think, it was the easy way out. And I don't know why anyone would choose a cesarean. For me, it was so traumatic, the whole experience of him being cut out, laying there for 45 minutes while they're stitching you up. You can't feel your body from your stomach down to your legs, and now you've got this life to look after, and you're like high on morphine. You're trying to breastfeed, but you can't even sit up to change. It's a very vulnerable state to be in, and especially when you've got something so precious now to look after and you have no idea what you're doing. I just remember now being wheeled into the hospital room for the night, and the doulas are making sure I'm okay, my gynae's making sure I'm okay, but now everyone wants to leave. At this point it was like midnight, and they're like, okay, you okay? I just remember holding him like this, looking at everyone about to leave, thinking, I don't know, why is everyone leaving? Like, I don't know, I can't do this. I'm still paralyzed. Where are you guys going? But luckily you were there.
Yeah, it was a terrible few days in hospital.
Yeah.
So we spent 3 nights in hospital. And just going back to the cesarean thing, I think I just want to add, like, looking into the birth industry, and it's quite, as with most things in the medical industry, really kind of based around fear. And it's crazy to, obviously having the cesarean is an incredible option if you need it. But looking at the rates of cesarean in our country, I think it's like 79% is the official rate, but up to like 90% they say in private hospital is cesarean. And so
cesarean,
so less and less people are doing natural birth, or at least trying to do natural birth, and so it's elective cesarean. So they're booking an appointment to go and get their baby cut out. And I think one of the reasons why he's so healthy in so many ways, I mean, the metrics, how much weight he's put on, how much weight he had when he left the hospital, all of that, and like
he didn't lose any weight while we were in hospital.
Yeah, and then he's picked up a kilo since we left, and
he's 2 weeks now.
He's thriving in every way, and I think it's because he still chose when he wanted to come. He still went through a process, and just going to get your baby cut out when the baby hasn't it's not ready yet, I think you're doing a disservice to your body and to your baby, because you're interrupting a natural process. And of course, if you have these interventions when it's necessary, go for it. Like it's incredible. But just booking a cesarean because it's more convenient, or because it's what your gynae would prefer to do, I think is quite shocking. And
I think it's also unfair though, because most gynaes will install fear because they don't want to take any risk. And so I've spoken to a lot of moms who want to go past their due date, but their gynaes actually won't let them go past 41 weeks.
But that is also a concept that I think is a fear. It's like, oh, this is your due date, and then everything afterwards is like, oh, you're late. But there is no such thing in nature. There is no time. There is no date. It's like there's an average.
We've been fear-mongered into going past 40 weeks is more dangerous for you and more dangerous for your baby, when in actual fact the average time of arrival for a first-time mom is 41 weeks and 6 days or 5 days.
It's almost 42 weeks, and that's actually the norm.
That's the norm. That's actually the normal average, but gynaes won't let most moms go past 41 weeks, and so they tell them all these things that could happen to you or could happen to the baby, or they just simply refuse to let you go past that point, in which case moms are then forced to book an elective cesarean because they have no other option.
Yes, again, and it's the system is like a loop where the gynae is on inherently at fault, but like you said, they don't want to take any risks. So because they're worried about if something goes wrong, people then sue them. So they offer you all these things to rather be like, you know what, if the worst case happens, I offered you this, I told you to do this.
Yes.
And so it's a self-perpetuating cycle of.
But even then, I mean, we just backtracking again. People don't go in for an elective cesarean just because they've gone past 40 weeks. It's more they get told they need to be induced. And the process of induction can then, most often cascades with more interventions which lead into a cesarean because of the induction causing contractions when the baby essentially wasn't ready to come.
And that's exactly what I kind of mentioned earlier, was when the potential cascade of, once you start interfering with nature, there's things that start to then you need to start doing, and then that could potentially lead to an emergency cesarean.
Yes.
And so there's always the what ifs, and I think it's at the end of the day, it is what it is, how it happened. But I remember speaking to Amy afterwards, and I was like, you know, what happens back in the day, would like this just have been like a disastrous situation? And then she said to me, it was something which was quite interesting. She's like, you never know, because if you, instance, were doing a home birth, or you were the midwife, or you would have been in a different environment, you wouldn't have got this check, which could have very well sent you into this process prematurely to some degree on that day. Maybe if you hadn't had the check, maybe things would have progressed differently. It would have been more normal, and he would have rotated and come on naturally. Maybe the epidural also stopped you from moving around a bit. But all these things happened, and the environment we were in was in a hospital. It was stressful. It wasn't this picture perfect birth scene that you kind of have in your mind. And so the environments that you're in, who knows what caused the outcome that we had, but there is always a what if. And I think once you start to interfere with nature, you can create a ripple effect, and then you have to interfere more and doing things like an induction is they always lead to, most of the time they lead to cesareans, because you're starting a process prematurely which the body's not ready for.
No, the baby's not ready for either, and so they're more likely go into distress because the contractions are so intense so quickly, and so the baby kind of gets a fright because they weren't ready for it. But yeah, it's
interesting.
No, but not yet to bash anyone in their birth story.
No,
going through birth, however you did it, is hard, and postpartum is also really hard, which I think is the segue we wanted to go into after the birth story, which was life with a newborn. A quick little recap of how we're doing at the moment, and it's tough. At the moment, it's just survival for me. I think postpartum, you don't realize with the newborn, you're essentially just feeding, trying to get them to sleep, and soothing and changing their nappies. And I'm still healing. I'm still bleeding. My cut. I can't drive for 6 weeks. I can't swim. I can't exercise. And so essentially I'm stuck at home, just tending to a newborn. And mentally, the first 2 weeks of postpartum was rough. And I've spoken to every single woman who's had a baby, and they all experience the same thing. You are extremely anxious. You're feeling depressed, then you're feeling guilty for feeling those ways because you've just got this beautiful life in front of you. But it's all because of the hormones that drop so drastically. But no one really prepares you for that. You get sent home with a baby, and then you come home and you cry every second, and you don't understand what's going on. You think something's wrong with you. Then you speak to other moms and you realize that it's all normal, but it's tough. Those first 2 weeks were horrible. I just remember being in this cloud of anxiety and sadness, and I just couldn't shake it away. But now it's gone. Now I'm just tired.
Sleep deprived.
I'm just really tired.
I think that's something I wanted to maybe mention a bit earlier, but just circling back to it was, again, there is no, at the end of the day, right or wrong, but I think letting the baby decide to come when it's ready, even if it ends up in a cesarean, is so much better, because you've had no issues with milk production, you've had no issues with, his weight and all these things, which you chat to other people out there and they've had electives, and then all of a sudden they have issues with their milk supply, and they have issues with this, and the baby's underweight and he hasn't. So I think in many ways you've been lucky. Your milk has been incredibly the way it came in, and where you've been able to feed. You've never had to worry about milk supply issues, and any of those natural processes are still there very much, which I think is a great thing. I think
that's what we would urge people to do then, is if for some reason you have to have a cesarean because of baby's position or whatever the case may be, try and let your body go into spontaneous labor before. You've still got time. Essentially I went into labor at 11 p.m. on the 14th of November, so we had many hours before I transitioned and then needed him to be cut out later that night of the next day.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the main message. It's like, go to where you can go, and let your body, start the process. I think that's...
Try and trust your body a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think we live in a society that doesn't do that, but let's not go down that rabbit hole. And yeah, I think the first few weeks of having a baby has been quite interesting. I don't know. I don't even know what my expectations were. And it's... How do I say this without it not sounding like so crazy? I think you expect to have this... I think because also it was a cesarean and it was like you were quite traumatized, your body was freaking out. The whole thing was quite tricky when he actually arrived, that it wasn't the experience that I had built up in my head or what society builds up, where it's like, oh my God, it's this amazing moment and all this love and all this, like, I didn't have that. But I mean, of course, it was very awe-inspiring, and like I was holding him for the first hour, and I was like, "This is quite a trip!" Like, and trying to wrap my head around it, and it was incredible. And of course, I had love for this being, but I must say, I think it's like any relationship that develops, and now that he's been here for a while, the relationship is forming, and it's becoming more and more exponentially crazy, and the love is just building. And so it has been a process, and I don't think whatever they sell you this idea of how it's supposed to be and having this guilt, or why don't I feel this way and that, because you sleep deprived the first few days, you're in this environment you don't want to be in, you got all these interventions, people coming in, and it's just really fucking with your flow of actually trying to like connect with this newborn. And so it is a process, and I think it's so incredible now to see how he's changing every day and growing, and the relationship develops. And yeah, I think the sleep deprivation thing is real, more so for you than me, because you got to feed every few hours.
Yeah, every 2 to 3 hours, sometimes every hour. It's rough.
And I was somebody before having a baby that like I really valued my sleep. I enjoyed good night's sleep, so it has been tough. It's like, okay, this is not ideal when you're trying to be productive and get things done, but it's okay.
But at the same time, we had this conversation this morning as well. The less time you have, the more you do with your time. So you being a lot more productive, you being a lot more grateful for the time that you do have.
I was thinking about this morning when I went to the gym, and I was like, there's so many, like, everybody has their opinions about things, and like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, now I'm a parent, so everybody should become parents. Like, if you don't, there's pros to not having kids, and there's pros to all the options that you want to do in life. But I was thinking, like you said, like, my time now is even more valuable. And so before, where I found myself kind of wasting time, even though I thought I was quite productive, now I'm finding, okay, if I get to go to the gym, I really appreciate that. And so like I have an extra good session, and I make sure I make every second count. Or if I have to do work, I have to get these things done so that I'm forced to be more efficient and productive. And so I think that having a baby, from what I can in the short space of time tell, is like anything in life I think worth having is going to be difficult. And I think having a kid is difficult. It's not easy, but I'm excited for the long-term rewards of it, because it's not easy, and anything not easy becomes something incredible. And that's definitely a truth I realize. And so it's easier to not have kids, and I can understand why people don't want to. And there's a part of me that mourns my old life.
Yeah, something that's natural as well. It is definitely natural. I find myself like, oh my gosh, who was I? I miss my old self. I
miss my old life. And I think I've said this to a few people. The first few days afterwards, I was trying to place my thoughts on like, what is this experience life like? And then for some reason, the death, rebirth cycle, which we go through continuously through life, and then this life is one of those cycles, of which I believe is of a bigger cycle. It's just like death, rebirth, whether it's death, rebirth of friends, groups, or businesses, or career, or whatever it is. As you move through life, you have these like metaphorical kind of death, rebirths, and I think having a kid is one of the biggest ones I've experienced, because you have to kind of mourn the death of your old life.
Yeah.
But there is a birth of a new one, and so you're trying to find your feet in this new life that you now have, and there is also a death, and I think it's a full spectrum of emotions, and I think it's not just all love and bliss, and yes, there is that, but there is also like, shit, this is quite fucking hectic.
It is, and it's full on, it doesn't stop.
Yeah,
you've got a human now for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and I think trying to think of the bigger picture is quite overwhelming. Like, I just take it day by day now. I'm not like, oh, we got a whole life of a baby, like, or the next 20 years or whatever it is. I don't really think about that now.
But I do believe that the newborn phase is the toughest phase. I know there'll probably parents listening to this laughing, thinking, just you wait and see. But I mean, once they get older and they can talk, and yes, it'll be a lot more busy, but this newborn phase is navigating sleep deprivation, having absolutely zero routine, feeding on demand, not knowing why they're crying. That's kind of stressful. Not being able to kind of get back into life at the moment. This feels like I feel like life has paused at the moment, and I'm in this like still point where it's just helping him survive every day, and life will continue after a couple of months. Oh, shame. Let me just grab him.
Okay, grab him there. He's sleeping here in the room with us. But I think that is definitely a big one. Trying to bring him in there.
Stretchy little man.
You gonna come onto camera, yeah?
Stretchy little man.
Yeah, I recognize, like, I've also thought everybody has their opinions. Everybody has, like, their stories about what it's going to be like, but it's not, because your experience is unique and individual. And so there is no right or wrong, and we think, oh, this should happen at this point, or you should be doing this because you did this yesterday, and I think you've struggled with that.
I have. I like to find a common thread so that I can understand it, and once I understand it, I've got less anxiety around it.
Well, you like to control things.
Yes.
So you've got a control issue. It's Tara's thing is control. And so she can't control how this baby's going to feed, or when he's going to feed, or how he's going to sleep, or if he's going to cry, or why he's crying, and so there's been a couple of moments of like, let's just take a breath. He's going to survive. He's going to be okay.
But the whole pregnancy was the same thing. I was trying to control the whole pregnancy. And it's so interesting that I don't, you can say what you want about astrology and whatnot, but your Saturn return is essentially the years before. I think it starts around 27. It depends on your dates. But your Saturn return starts just before you enter quote unquote adulthood, and it's kind of like an initiation into adulthood, and you get tested with all the lessons that you haven't learned in your 20s before you enter your 30s. And I fell pregnant 5 days into my Saturn return, and I thought, oh wow, I've got an easy Saturn return, because one of the Saturn returns can be like, oh yeah, pregnancy or child rearing. Oh wow, I really must have learned all my lessons, because now I'm getting exactly what I wanted. But I got exactly what I needed, because it was 9 months of brutal, ongoing lessons of relinquishing control and surrendering to something I can't control, even though it's something I want so badly.
Which is still an ongoing process.
Still an ongoing
As part of the pregnancy, I was like, I don't think I ever want to go through this again. Because I also had to work away for most of the pregnancy, and trying to control things at home by herself, and freaking out in her head about every little thing. And I think just trying to zoom out. I think we try to do that a lot more nowadays. Is zoom out and look at the bigger pictures. Like, he's going to be fine. Yeah. There's going to be challenges along the way.
And things and unexpected turns on the road. But I think that's just parenthood.
Yeah.
And I'm excited. I mean, despite everything we've said with regards to sleep deprivation and mourning our old selves and not having as much time and having a lot more responsibility, we can't just go pack up now for the weekend and go to a festival anymore. I still wouldn't trade this for anything else. It's just a love, like the sense of purpose that I feel now, even though it's tough in the beginning. It's like no other. I understand now why I'm here.
Yeah, and I think the primal roles of like male and female in a partnership with a baby. Also, I mean, we've set ourselves up in quite a way where like we know how we want to go in life, and I think that also plays a big part in us having quite an easy, manageable first time experience for the most part. I mean, like, horror stories out there, but where I'm going with it is like, if you've been able to just be a mom, like that is so incredible, because that is beyond it. Like, that's what your main focus is now, to be a mom.
Yeah.
And like, I'll never forget getting home and like doing the washing, and I was like, I felt so fulfilled doing like the washing and like making sure things are sorted out, because my role becomes like caregiver and protector, and making sure everything, like I have like the macro and you have the micro of like, you have to like make him survive and feed him. I don't have much involvement in the first phase of his life, the first year or so,
but you're looking after me.
Yes, but imagine you had to go back to work, and a lot of women have to go back to work after a few weeks, and then they're going to manage that. And I feel like the society we live in is so fucked in that way, and like we don't value motherhood and being a mother, because that is like the ultimate job. And so like I've had more sense of wanting to like get shit done and get serious and like really provide. And I think it's quite a cool like fire up your arse when you have a kid. It's like, okay, you can't, even though like I've been trying to fuck around less as I've gotten older, it's like, now I really can't fuck around. And so it's quite cool because it's like a challenge. It's like, okay, am I going to level up from this challenge? Are we going to make it? There's always stresses, whether it's business, finances, or whether it's whatever the things are. And I think it's exciting because it kind of raises the stakes. The having a child, if you are ready to commit to something like that. And so I'm excited.
And we're very grateful that you allow me to just be a mom.
Be a mom and swipe cards all day.
Swipey. But it is. Being a mom is one of the most fulfilling jobs, and I think it's very undermined in our society nowadays. Women are being more praised for being independent and hardworking, and they're masculine most of the time, which is raising their cortisol, making them stressed out, and I don't know, there's just nothing more.
I
mean, if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. But if you do just want to be a mom and look after a precious baby and, get better in the kitchen and look after your household, there's nothing more fulfilling than that. And having your husband, needing your husband in another way.
Yeah, and looking at how it's been, the whole structure of society, and there's so many interesting reasons for it, without going into conspiracy theories, but like looking at how they've really sold this whole woman need to go out and be like men and be equal, but it's not. We're not equal, and like having this idea that being a mom at home is like inferior to going out and working as well and being in this high corporate job or whatever it is. It's just crazy, and it's making women more unhappy and men more unhappy, and just the balance between masculine and feminine has become so distorted in society because the realities we live in are just not, they've almost been constructed for us, for the benefits of
the corporate.
and not for the individual family nuclear life. And I think there's so much to unpack on that. We're not going to get into it, but it's interesting, and I'm glad we're in the position that we are in to enjoy this the proper way, I think. And
I know. Perfect timing.
Yeah.
It always is. Hey, Rogie Rokes.
Definitely.
Hey, Rogie Rokes.
And on that note, I think we should wrap up. Is there anything else you want to end with?
No. Newborns smell amazing.
Yeah, they do smell pretty cool. He's like my best friend in the day, and then at night at like 1 a.m, when he's screaming, I'm like, okay, I don't really love you as much at the moment. No, I'm joking. Okay.
Hey, Rogues, the pleasure is.
He'll sleep the whole day, and then at night he's like, okay, it's time to be awake now. Like, can we reverse this cycle?
It'll happen.
Cool.
Apparently it gets easier after 3 months.
So
we're already almost in 4 weeks. Hey, almost 4 weeks.
To wrap it up, I just want to say that there's no right or wrong. I think trust your intuition, and we just want to share our experience because we don't really know what we're doing. We're just figuring it out. But
this is just our experience, our opinions on the whole thing, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you want to see the footage of my birth, I have posted on my Instagram.
Have you posted already?
Not yet, but once this is up, it will be up.
Okay.
Rogie,
all right, that's a wrap.